We have a memorandum by our governance manager, Hannah, on page 119. Now, I'm taking that it's as read, and it's very administrative, this. So the resolution there is that Council approves the recommended meeting changes listed in Table 1 of the report, amendment to Council and Committee meeting schedule for 2021, presented to Council on the 7th of April today, 2021. I'll look to, well, first of all, is there any questions of the officer? There being none, I'll look to move it. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. There being none, we will vote, please. And that is passed, 16 votes for and none against. Right, now to, again, Committee Council work schedule, number 16 on the agenda, page 123. And I'll take that as being read. Probably the only thing I would add to it is we obviously have just spoken or look to keep on the table, lie on the table, the Cuba Street, and we just need to get an understanding that'll come back to this council.
Just on that, through you, Mr Mayor, I'll come back to you on a date for that. I'll need to just have a chat with the Chief Infrastructure Officer and understand what requirements we have going forward, and when that whether that could come as you desire to the next meeting or the one after. But yes, it will come back through you.
Yep, appreciate it. Thank you. I'll open it up for any other matters arising. There is a couple that want to speak. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to query, in our December council meeting, we passed a resolution to review the shareholding arrangements around CETA. Didn't see specific mention of that here.
Come to your committee.
Yes, we'll add that.
Oh.
Well, certainly the focus of the work with CETA at the moment is revising the Statement of Expectations and the Statement of Intent. Once that work is done, we'll turn our attention to giving effect to that resolution and starting a conversation with MDC. But I remind the Council, MDC's position has been very clear on that they do not want to be party to a partnership where they're not 50-50, but we will start that conversation with MDC and come back to the Council.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question around the reporting for the Māori wards decision that we've voted on, and just having that included in the work schedule, because that will come back to the June meeting.
Okay. So we've got 3 extras there: Cuba Street, Stage 2, CETA shareholding and Māori wards. So they'll be added. I'll look to move that we receive the work schedule for April, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. No other comments? Okay, we'll vote, please. It's 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, recommendations from our various committee meetings during the month of March. I will now, number 17, which is around presentation of Part 1 Public Planning and Strategy Committee recommendations from its March 10th meeting, and I'll pass to the Deputy Mayor to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the Part 1 Public Planning and Strategy Committee recommendations from the 10th of March 2021 meeting be adopted.
And look for a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. Thank you. Open it up for any matters arising from that. There being none, we will vote. That has passed 16 votes for, none against. We will now go to number 18, which is around presentation of Part 1 Public Economic Development Committee recommendations from its March 17 meeting. I'll pass to you, the Chair, Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendations for the Part 1 Public Economic Development Committee meeting for March 17 meeting 2021.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Dennison. Thank you. Right, any matters arising? There being none, we will vote, please. And that has passed 16 votes for and none against. Right, we now go to number 19, which is presentation of Part 1 Public Community Development Committee recommendations from its March 17 meeting. And I'll go to the Chair, Councillor Johnson.
So I would like to move the following recommendations from the Part 1 Public Community Development Committee meeting of the 17th of March 2021. 4.21, 5.21, 2, 3 and 4, and 6.21 be adopted. And that 5.211 and 5.215 be not adopted.
Okay, that's moved. Is there a seconder? Thank you, the Deputy Mayor. All right, are there any matters arising?
Can I speak to that? So the reason for not moving all of the recommendations from committee is due to my understanding that those who supported the original amendment to include restriction for new off licences have changed their position, and as a consequence 5 falls off. Sorry, so under 5.211, if that's no longer supported, then 5.215 is no longer necessary, so it's a consequent change. So the actual change is just not, I believe that there's no longer the support for 5.211 that there was at the committee meeting. I'm happy to test that.
Okay. All right, we'll just at a moment to get that up on the screen, but there is a couple of other comments from matters arising. Councillor Dennison.
I'm going to stand to speak in support of what's been moved by the Chair. I was one that was advocating for some more clauses in the proposed policy, but I've taken now a reflection on that promotion and want to take a pragmatic approach and actually get the adoption of the LAP in place with the restricted hours. And so that is declaring publicly a changed viewpoint, which I think is healthy and good decision making, and support along what the Chair's moved. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I also would like to take a pragmatic approach here, but I think my direction is slightly different. I supported the reconsultation on this because I did think that our policy didn't address some of the issues that members of our community have addressed with me following this debate in public around sensitive sites, particularly around the number of bottle stores in our city, and I continue to hold the view that those things are an important thing that we should seek community views on. But my pragmatic concern here reflects back to the comments by officers in presenting that report, that if we go ahead with further consultation, or even go ahead as proposed by the Chair here, what is absolutely guaranteed is this will be appealed. And the officer's comment, when asked about the detail of that, was that it would take probably at least a couple of years to go through that process. So what we're faced with is whatever decision we make on those resolutions today, you will not get an active local alcohol policy for at least 2 years, at least. If we go ahead with further consultation, I hear people's concerns around further cost, officer time, community fatigue, and those are real concerns, no question about it. Whatever comes back under the current legislation is capable of being appealed. And the evidence showed that when local alcohol policies were appealed, the result of that was always, without exception, a weaker local alcohol policy than the one that went into the appeal process. So not only by adopting this will you not get an active local alcohol policy, what you will get post-appeal is, in all likelihood, a weaker local alcohol policy than the one you think you're signing up to today. And so on that basis, Mr. Mayor, I would like to move a procedural motion that consideration of the draft local alcohol policy lies on the table until we receive feedback on the government's work schedule that includes, we have indication, a review of the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act, which specifically references the potential for repealing the appeal policy. So I will seek a seconder for that.
All right, is there a seconder?
Sorry, point of order, Mr. Mayor. I don't believe that an elected member can speak and then move a procedural motion. I believe that they have to state they're moving a procedural motion and then they can give their rationale, whereas the member has clearly just spoken and then moved a procedural motion.
Thank you.
So
I checked the standing orders and I'm pretty sure that I can, in speaking, move a procedural motion.
Interpretation, it's fine.
Thank you.
So there is a seconder. Okay, there is a second and we'll test the meeting. So there's no more comment. We just...
Oh, sorry, am I allowed to write for reply?
Not on a procedural
No,
motion.
not a
okay.
procedural motion. Just give us a moment. So that's been moved by Councillor Bowen, it's been seconded by Councillor Meehan, and then we'll just put it to the vote and then we'll see where we go.
So there's government work on repealing or reviewing the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Acts until we receive notification of further details of that work. Because they might come back and say they're not doing it, in which case back on the table. According to the information from Pat, for your police, yes.
Mr. Mayor, can I query and challenge your decision on your ruling for the procedural motion to terminate or adjourn debate? Under 2.14.1,
Yes.
it says, any member who has not spoken on the matter under debate may move any one of the following procedural motions to terminate or adjourn debate, but not so as to having to interrupt the speaker, a member speaking. And I believe that the member has spoken.
I've made a ruling. It is what it is, Councillor. So we're going to put it to the vote and we'll see what comes out of that. And I've had staff advice on that. The ruling is correct. So we just get it up online. We will vote on it and the discussion may continue, it may not. You got it there? All right, councillors, that's what we've got on the, as the recommendation. You either vote for this or vote against it, and there's no more discussion. We will vote now, please. And that has failed. 5 votes for and 9 against. So the discussion continues. Right, I have people in the speaking queue, and I'll now go to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am supporting the changes, the recommendations proposed by Councillor Johnson, and I am glad that that vote we just put through lost, because there were a number of things that were stated by the member who spoke that were just simply not true. There is absolutely no guarantee that this will be appealed. Similarly, there is no guarantee that this won't be appealed. There is no evidence that anybody around this table has to say that the Palmerston North City Council local alcohol policy will be appealed. Nothing. So it's all hearsay. The flippant remarks made by somebody with no evidence. We can say the exact same statement both ways to argue a case. We have consulted on this policy 3 times already. This has come back to us with some moderate changes proposed. It is normal process when we go out and take submissions that we listen to what people have said, and then we put forward a policy taking on board submissions that we've heard, which don't always alleviate every single concern raised by the community. We are never going to go through a submission process where we have got 100% support for every aspect of what we do. What is proposed is a moderate response and gets a policy live. I don't believe that we will, by going out for a 4th round of consultation or going out to seek further advice, still result in everybody happy. What we need to do is make a decision. Councillor Finlay has given us a history on this conversation multiple times. Every time we've gone into debate after these submissions, he's talked about the fact that whilst it may have been considered by the council over the last 7 years, in actual fact these conversations have been going on much longer than that. We've got to stop talking about what a policy could or could not involve and make a decision. And I believe that today we need to make that decision. I would commend the people who have changed their position. Councillor Dennison has alluded to this, and I've had conversations with Councillor Naylor. There are definitely opportunities that we may have to reduce the harm that alcohol causes our community. But we can't do any of that if we don't have a policy to begin with. So I think that this is the first step, is to get a policy up live, and then we can look at how it goes, we can review it, and then look at having further conversations around additional restrictions. But we can't do that if we don't have a policy to begin with. And right now, some of the conversations that have been had around this table are not leading us in any direction towards getting a policy. So I'll be supporting the recommendations that Councillor Johnson has put up, and I would urge you all to do the same.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd also like to speak in support of the recommendations in front of us, and just like to perhaps give a little bit of explanation to what might be perceived as perhaps a change of tact from the committee stage, being the one perhaps to have led the consideration of further restrictions at the committee. I've certainly given this quite a lot of thought and done a little bit of research and also had some very useful conversations with other elected members and others who are also outside of the room. I think my view is that I'm interested in having a local alcohol policy that is as effective as possible in delivering the objective of reducing alcohol-related harm. And it is my view that I would like to progress in due course some of those additional restrictions, but in the first instance I do agree with what other councillors have said, that we need to have an LAP live and initiate the restrictions that have already been included in that draft that we hopefully will be able to confirm very soon, to get that in place as soon as possible, and then perhaps further restrictions can be imposed at a later date. But certainly I support what I guess has been described as a pragmatic approach, and hope to see perhaps that in place very soon. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to clarify that I am planning to vote here, and then give a little bit of context around that. Some of you may remember that I wasn't in the room during the Community Development Committee meeting, but had the privilege of watching 2 hours on one single item, ably chaired, I might add, which really gave me a really good flavor of where that debate sat, and I'm quite comfortable with understanding the perspectives that were shared during the committee meeting. In terms of where I sit on this, would be fair to say that I'm underwhelmed, perhaps disappointed, frustrated, and everything else, especially in terms of where it's going in the off-license space. But I'm also aware that we can't just keep circling in the hopes that something better is going to happen. We actually need to land something. So I will be supporting the recommendations on the screen so that we can get something in place, albeit flawed.
Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am quite keen on getting a local alcohol policy live, and I've been looking at all of the issues as well, and I think for me, I would be supportive of most of it, but I'm still not keen on the 2 a.m. option. I would actually prefer a 3 a.m. option for the on licenses, because I know that often those environments are actually safer than off-license areas. And so both the options, the 2 a.m. option and the 3 a.m. option, were presented to us. We've already done consultation on a few of the rounds. We heard from local business owners. So I would be more comfortable accepting it if there was a 3 a.m. option. So if 4 was to fail, I would put forward a 3 a.m. option.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will support this, mainly because one thing is we need an alcohol policy. We haven't got one. We've talked about one. But here we have a chance to vote and have one on the books which can be altered later on. It may be toothless. It may be not much use at all, but it's a policy. And it's a starting point. Changes can be made, so I will support it in the hope that in the future we may be able to do something to limit the alcohol harm in this city.
Thank you, councillors. Just before I go back to you, councillor, for a right of reply, as you're aware, I've spoken in favour of stronger controls around the off licences. I think that's where we're getting the preloading and the real issues. It's going to be hard, but at least we're taking a stand, and I was prepared to join with you, the majority of you, in that. But I also spoke around against the 2 a.m, but I've changed my opinion, and there's a couple of reasons why. Firstly, the Wellington situation. Those you would have seen just recently, I think last Friday, there was a public march around what is happening in Wellington, which is really around alcohol-fuelled harm. not only violence but sexual harm, and they've had enough, and that council has not addressed it and has let the publicans and the on licences really control that town, and to their detriment really. But what really made me sit up and take notice was a recent City Safety Trust report. I get them along with the CEO, and the last one was quite damning. A 19-year-old soldier was king hit in Main Street. He's basically on life support. So, I just think we need to do something. So I'm going to change my opinion and my vote, because I really felt for that family. So write a reply back to you, Councillor.
So thank you all for your comments. And often councillors are accused of having a fixed position on something, but I think this debate has shown that councillors do approach things with an open mind and are very willing to reconsider their position should new evidence come to light. My personal response to the comments is that I think in this situation pragmatism has to win over idealism. And whilst we might all take different positions on whether or not we feel that the level of restriction goes far enough, or in some cases feel that it goes a little too far, ultimately we have to come up with a policy that we can all agree on that is defensible. And though I was, as Councillor Barrett pointed out, very busy chairing that session, I did take on board the recommendations of officers around where we had evidence to support putting in restriction and where we did not. And it's more important to me that we have some policy, albeit not the perfect policy, in place, and then we can assess over the next wee while how it works. And if it has the desired effect, it can stay. If we find that it's not restrictive enough, we may well by that stage have got some evidence gathered that would support further restrictions. And if we feel it's too restrictive, we can make it less restrictive. So this isn't like one policy forever. This is a policy, a reasonable stab at a policy after many years of development. And I just really think it was much more important to get this in place than it is to continue to consult and have it stretching over more and more years and end up with no policy at all. So I think I'm pleased with the debate I've heard around the table. And I think just to address the point of appeal, if any policy we put in place is certain to be appealed, as has been suggested, then it's better that we get a policy in place sooner rather than later so that that process can go through. Thanks.
All right, councillors, that was the right reply, so we will now vote.
Mr Mayor, can I ask that we take 521 element 4 separately, please, the 2 a.m. option? Thank you.
Yep, we can do that, and we'll just allow the staff a little bit of time there. So we're going to vote on 2 and 3 first. We'll do the whole lot bar the 2. I'm sorry, bar 4. Okay, so we're going to do everything bar 4. Everything that's on the screen. Okay, that's passed. 14 votes for, none against. And now we will vote on number 4.
Can I just clarify what we're voting on? Council resolves to not adopt recommendation 4. Yes, that's recommendation 4, but at the moment it says resolves not to adopt. Yes. I'm not unscrupulous. Not entirely. Not
Well spotted. Oop. Okay, we're ready to vote now. This is around number 4, whether we are to adopt it, not, yeah. This is the 2AM option. And that has passed 10 votes for, 4 against. Okay, so my understanding is officers will come back with a policy document to us on April the 28th. I'm seeing nodding in the background there, so that's good.
Mr Mayor, that was the advice I received, that I don't need to make any further recommendation.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, councillors. Right, moving on to 20, which is presentation of Part 1 Public Finance and Audit recommendations from their March 24th meeting. I'll ask the Chair, Councillor Beattie, to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the recommendations from the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of the 24th of March be adopted.
And seconded by Councillor Naylor. Are there any matters arising from that? Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I ask to have 22.21 separated, which was the stage 3 options for Papaoia Place housing? In the committee, we had quite a at-length debate around 3 options that were proposed by officers. One was to build 10 units, you'll recall. The other one was build 7 and build a community centre on site. And a third option, which was to build 10 units and to upgrade the pavilion on Papaoia Park for not only a community space for residents to use freely, but also an upgrade to the recreational space for the cricket and soccer. That did come with an additional cost. I'm promoting a reconsideration of the proposed option from committee to one which I think gets a better outcome. The option 3 was to build 10 units and to upgrade at a figure I can't recall exactly, but in the 500,000 bracket, to upgrade the pavilion, which we'll need to do at some stage anyway. It needs an assessment on the earthquake strengthening and other delayed asset management issues, potentially. But we would get an outcome for recreation and the social outcome for those residents. We would also get 3 extra units for Papaoia Place. Without repeating all the arguments, because we all spoke pretty much on that item and at length, I'm keeping it brief, that I'm going to oppose what's there, which was from the committee recommendation. If that lapses, I'm looking to move what was the option 3 options in the committee report. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks. Just to request a separation for 1821.
Okay, we can do that. And Councillor Johnson.
So just to follow from Councillor Dennison's comments, just to remind people that the community hall that we voted for in committee is not the same in any respect as the use of the pavilion as a community hall. So the sizes are different. The community hall that we voted for to be built in the centre of the complex was 100 metres square. The one that was described as part of the pavilion is only 40 metres square, and that is the most expensive option. And it's also the option, as we were told at the time, with the most risk. So I just want to make sure that in councillors' minds, we haven't forgotten that it's not this hall or that hall, them being equal. One hall is 2.5 times the size of the other, and remembering that we're going to have 85 or possibly more units on that site, I think we need the bigger hall, irrespective of which hall that would be. So I just want you to bear that in mind when you're thinking about voting. Thank you.
All right, we've got the recommendations there. We just to recap, which ones are we doing separately? Okay, we're going to do Papiaoea. Which one are we doing first? I'll do those three first. Okay, we're doing the first three on the screen there. So it's around airport and fees and charges. So, so I've got, yep, okay. Councillor Finlay, you wish to speak.
I just, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish to stand and support the existing Papiaoea Place community centre. There are hundreds and hundreds of studies worldwide on the well-being of these communities, and every one of them says it is necessary to have a meeting point, a suitable meeting point. When asked, the staff admitted here that no social wellbeing studies had been made into Papiaoea Place and whether or not there should be a hall or where it should be. We've had the residents of Papiaoea Place come to us and ask for a decent meeting place. We have people saying, why don't we use the pavilion? For starters, the pavilion has not even been earthquake tested. We don't know if it's a possibility. We've got to look at sharing it with sports bodies instead of having a dedicated, new built, well-established community meeting place in the centre of Papiaoea Place, which will be there for many years to come. And I think we have to look at the future and say we should support the initial vote. Thank you.
Okay, we've started something. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in the spirit of people changing their minds today, I wasn't actually in the room by the time we got round to voting on this in committee. It was a very long day, members will recall. But I went into that, having read the reports and thinking that probably the pavilion would have my support as a building with an interesting quasi-heritage background and an opportunity to do something to save that building, maybe save a bit of money, and also create a community space. Having listened to the debate that I was there for most of, and then following some of that discussion later, I have changed my position on that and will be supporting the recommendation that came through from Council for the new build option, primarily because it is so much less risk, but also for the reasons of space that Councillor Johnson outlined. 100 metres squared is a significant increase in service to 40 metres squared when we're looking at a community who have very limited personal space for gathering with friends and neighbours. So I'll be supporting the original recommendation as moved. Thank you.
All right, we have the three recommendations around the airport and fees and charges. We'll go with those first. If you could vote, please. Has passed 14 votes for and 2 abstentions. The options that we've just been speaking about and the recommendation there, we will vote on that Papiaoea Place. And has passed 12 votes for, 2 against and 2 abstentions. And our final, around the Esplanade Cafe. Ask you to vote, please. And that has passed 13 votes for and 3 abstentions. Councillors, that has completed part 1, and because we have Cuba Street's still on the table, it doesn't require us with part 2, and we've already passed the minutes at the start. So that is our meetings completed. Well done. A record, really, for 20-odd contentious issues. All right, we'll have a quick turnaround, maybe 5 minutes, and into the Missoula room for councillor only.